Hello and welcome back to Through the Trapdoor. I'm Katie.
And I'm Emily.
And here's our podcast where we read you Harry Potter fanfiction.
This week we're drinking Stagger Unicorn's Blackberry.
Because it's such a stretch for us to be drinking anything other than Staggering Unicorn wine.
I did attempt to open another bottle of something else the other day that someone had gifted to me, and I took one sip and was like, nope, pouring this out. Can't drink it. It was very dry. The first sip tasted good. And I was like, oh, I might be able to drink this. And then the second sip, I was like, nope, la, la, la. The thing where when wine's too dry, it dries out your entire mouth.
Yes.
It was that kind of dry wine.
Not a fan.
No. Couldn't do it. All right. Anyway, do you have any fun announcements?
Other than the fact that we are down to the last 2 episodes, no.
Yes. We're down to the last 2 episodes of this. I can't believe it.
I know. It's been a long journey.
Yeah. In other news, I'm sure you guys know I'm moving in a couple weeks, which means we're going to wrap up recording this, and then instead of our usual one-shots that we start doing, we're going to do a couple
blooper episodes, basically, with our rants and such.
Because we have a lot of rants that Ben pulls out of our episodes and saves and bloopers and all that. So he's going to try to compile them into probably
1 or 2 episodes?
Yeah, probably 2 episodes, because we'll have all our recording stuff packed up for probably a week and a half to 2 weeks.
All right, so it's my turn to read. So here we go. Here is the first half of chapter 20, The Headmaster. Harry wasn't quite sure what he was staring at the next morning when he opened his eyes. All he saw was red. It was brilliant, scarlet, and seemed nearly transparent, yet it also seemed to snatch and contain the morning rays of light in shimmering glory. Sounds like he's describing my hair. He lay there just staring at the color, his head resting softly on a down-filled pillow. For a while he squinted, trying to make out what he was looking at, but it was just a blur. He didn't have his glasses on. Not that it mattered much. He couldn't move, or at least he was convinced of it. His whole body ached slowly as he began to think of why he was in that state. The previous night's events swarmed to the surface of his mind. The Cruciatus curse that Draco Malfoy had set on him, the tight cords that had bound him, the time he had spent clinging to the back of the Magnus mare, the struggle with Voldemort. He sat bolt upright as he remembered the vision that had come to him as he had ridden up the Minister's Drive. The one of Snape on the ground and of Dumbledore clutching at a failing heart. And that laugh. Blindly, he reached around for his glasses. There was a nightstand at his bedside. His fingers brushed against the medicine bottles before them. As he situated them on his nose, the red thing in the room fluttered and landed softly at his side. Harry turned to Fawkes's head, brushing his shoulder. While it was comforting, at the same time, it greatly disturbed him. "What are you doing here?" His voice was still raw. Fawkes just blinked back. With a bit of determination, Harry forced his aching body out of bed. At first, he was afraid his legs would not decide to hold him up. Shakily, he stood up, grabbing a bedpost for support. Then Fawkes flew over and rested on his shoulder. The bird was big, the size of a goose or a swan. Harry's shoulder wouldn't have been large enough to hold the bird several years ago, but now, somehow, the weight of the bird wasn't what he expected, and he also managed to feel stronger while it was there. "Were you naked?"
I like how you didn't read it, you just asked the question.
He snatched his robes, where they had been draped over a chair, and started hunting for his shoes. Once he had them slipped on, he hurried out of the room, with Fawkes clinging to his shoulder. "Harry, dear, what are you doing up?" came the startled Mrs. Weasley as Harry hurled down the stairs. I want to go back to Hogwarts, he said quickly. Mr. Weasley stood up and watched as Mrs. Weasley ran over. You shouldn't be up so soon. She looked ready to hug him, but she seemed unsure what to do since he had a phoenix perched on his shoulder at the moment. Dumbledore, Harry asked nervously, where is he? Mrs. Weasley turned to her husband Arthur and walked over. We don't know, Harry. We don't know. He and Voldemort had both disappeared by the time the Aurors had got there. Harry swallowed. And Professor Snape? Mr. Weasley's face showed signs he hadn't slept the night before, and there seemed to be wrinkles on his face that Harry hadn't quite remembered seeing before. Sirius Black succeeded in bringing him back, but I will be going to Hogwarts to check on him and Mr. Lupin. Is Lupin all right? And Sirius? Both were injured, but will recover. Can I go with you? What? Can I go with you when you go to the school? Mrs. Weasley didn't seem to like that much. I think he should stay here, Arthur. He needs rest before he faces the students. Harry, you've been through enough already. No, Harry argued. Fawkes's presence was definitely making him feel stronger. I want to find out what happened to Dumbledore and Professor Snape. It was strange. Him and Ron had joked about Snape getting knocked off numerous times, but now that it might actually be faced with that possibility, may I go back? Arthur! Mrs. Weasley placed a hand on Harry's free shoulder. I don't want him under any more stress. He needs rest.
I'm pretty sure that keeping him would cause him more stress.
Right, come on, Molly. But Molly, I think that he wishes to come along. He deserves to. Mrs. Weasley frowned and let out a sigh. Well, you take care of yourself. She attempted to smooth his hair. I think he's already proven that he's quite capable of doing that, Mr. Weasley commanded fondly. Now, we'll be leaving by Portkey whenever you're ready. I'm ready now, Harry stated firmly. All right then, off we go.
I feel the same way, Arthur. All right then.
Alrighty then. Not without breakfast, Mrs. Weasley said sharply. Harry turned to face her. I need to find out what happened, he said kindly. Her eyes began to well with tears. She was actually a few inches shorter than him. When she finally decided to hug him, her head only came to his nose. I'm worried about Dumbledore too, she whispered. She started to cry, and suddenly Harry wanted to as well. But then Arthur came and pulled Molly away. He held her for a while until she managed to gain some composure. See to it that Harry gets rest. I don't want any ministry officials asking him all sorts of questions. I'll see they keep their distance. I have say over that now. As Harry followed Mr. Weasley to the garden, he noticed that he now walked with a distinct limp. Harry then remembered Percy. He began to think about Voldemort. Had Voldemort survived? His mind suddenly flashed him images, much like last night, only this one was of a fireplace. He had seen it somewhere before, but he wasn't quite sure where. A dream, perhaps? Yes, it had been a dream. Pain shot through his scar and forced the image from his mind. Ready? Mr. Weasley asked, stopping by an iron hitching post with the bust of a unicorn mounted on top. Harry nodded. What about Fawkes? Mr. Weasley thought. He should be able to take care of himself. Together, they grabbed the hitching post, and Harry found himself being pulled away. His feet touched the ground in Hogsmeade. Fawkes had remained fixed to his shoulder the whole time. Minister? Harry heard Mad Eye's voice. You traveled alone? He almost sounded as if he was scolding. Just to hear, Alistair. Besides, I have the great Harry Potter with me. Mr. Weasley said this, attempting to sound cheerful, but there was darkness underneath that could not be covered up. Harry followed Mr. Weasley and Moody back to Hogwarts. Along the way, he noticed that Moody's eye kept swiveling around to peer at Fawkes. He followed them up the front steps to the main doors. The entrance hall had been lit by golden shafts of light fluttering through the windows, dancing off the dust floating in the air. They weren't walking quickly, as Mr. Weasley's crippled pace was slow. As they neared the end, Harry saw standing there Sirius, Lupin with bandages tied around his jaw, and Professor Snape leaning on a pair of crutches. When Harry spotted them, he took off running, feeling somehow rejuvenated. Fawkes released his shoulder and flapped his great scarlet wings. When Harry stopped and stood before them, all three merely glanced at him before their eyes landed on Fawkes, who fluttered down to rest once again on Harry's shoulder. The expression that then crossed their faces were not what he had been expecting. Sirius started to blink hard, as if fighting back tears, as he continued to stare at the bird. Lupin had a similar expression, only he put a hand on his head and pulled on his cheek, and a tear actually fought its way free and ran down his nose. Severus Snape stared at the bird too, but he had turned away, hiding his face. Harry now knew. Dumbledore was dead. The halls didn't feel the same. Nothing was the same. There was always something amiss in the week that followed. Classes were solemn, and there were no disciplinary problems. Even Filch was not so mean, nor Mrs. Norris so menacing. And the only thing that Harry saw Peeves do was push over a suit of armor once while he was floating grumpily down the hall. There was no place to get away from it, and Harry had the added pain of having Fawkes refuse to leave his side. Once he went down to Hagrid's hut to inquire on how to care for a phoenix, but Hagrid had seemed so desperately miserable and had shed fresh tears at the sight of the bird, Harry had not returned. The following week was the week of final testing. They had not been canceled. Now Harry had to face his owls. Monday morning, he sat staring blankly at the pages of his potions notebook. He wasn't retaining anything that he had studied. His mind kept wandering. There was a question that was nagging at his mind over everyone's in the magical community. What had happened to Voldemort? From what he had heard, by the time Sirius and Lupin got there, they had only found Severus and Salazar Snape wounded, Severus more critically, and the Aurors dispatched to take care of the Death Eaters had informed that Voldemort's followers were fleeing. Something had happened to Voldemort. It was always then that Harry was reminded of the visions he had had, and sometimes when he thought of them, he'd see more. More of the fireplace and of the dark interior of a manor that looked as if it hadn't been lived in for 50 years. Then, suddenly, one of a graveyard, and of a headstone that read, Tom Riddle. Harry looked up from his notebook. Now, he knew what he was seeing. He slammed the book closed and headed out of the common room. He had to find Sirius. However, before he could get to the staff quarters, he was stopped in the hall. There was an argument, and Snape's voice was echoing up ahead. "You know very well that Draco Malfoy participated," he yelled. "I have already spoken with Minerva and the heads of houses, and we all agree that he is to be expelled." Harry backed up. This sounded like one argument he didn't wish to accidentally step into. "You can't expel a student without a headmaster," Professor LaSalle argued back. "You can with the approval of the deputy headmaster and heads of houses." "You're dooming that boy if you do, Severus," LaSalle spoke more quietly. "You're resigning him to our own fate." Snape paused before saying, "He's already lost." "Maybe, but I'm not ready to give up." "Look what he did to Potter," Snape said more loudly. "If it hadn't been partly for Draco Malfoy, Albus might still be here with us." "Don't you dare," LaSalle shot venomously. "Don't you dare put that blame on that boy's shoulders." "I don't. Not all of it, though someone does carry most of the burden." There was dead silence. Harry dared to peer around the corner. It was a standoff. Each Snape was staring down the other in a lone corridor. "It wasn't my fault, Severus," LaSalle whispered. I tried to stall." "Yes, you did. And I don't even want to ask about the appalling death of that muggle I read about in the Daily Prophet." Snape appeared very cold, while the look on LaSalle's face was a mixture of pain and anger. "I did what I had to do," he stated firmly. You did wrong, Snape continued, to stare down his cousin, even though LaSalle had averted his eyes to the floor. Dumbledore gave each of us a chance. A last chance. I've been able to fulfill my part of the bargain. The weakness for both of us was power in the lore of the dark arts. I came to understand that, but I don't think you have. You went back on your promise and disrespected the chance Dumbledore gave you. You almost immediately on that night when you went to the Longbottoms with the Lestranges. I never said anything, hoping that it would be, but you failed again. LaSalle was still staring down at the floor. I tried, Severus, he said between his teeth. I didn't know that it would take so long for you and Dumbledore. You didn't have to know, Snape interrupted furiously. All you had to know was that when Voldemort was in trouble, he'd summon the Death Eaters. But you didn't wait for that. And I know why. You were afraid of having Voldemort destroyed without you. Ever so slowly, Salazar lifted his head to look Snape in the eyes. I suppose I won't trouble you any more then, he said quietly. Can't have me responsible for getting anyone else killed. He turned away and walked steadily down the hall. You may tell whoever the new headmaster is that I resign. And to save you the trouble, I'll take Draco home and inform Lucius and Narcissa of the school's decision to have him expelled. He said nothing more and disappeared through the front mirror. Snape stood alone in the middle of the hall. Momentarily, he allowed his shoulders to slump and he rubbed his eyes with his fingers before he gripped a cane he was now using and hobbled off. Harry? Harry whirled around and for some reason, as if by instinct, he reached for his wand. Hermione and Ron were standing behind him. They were holding hands. Right now, however, they were preoccupied with staring suspiciously at his wand hand. Harry? You okay there, chap? Ron asked hesitantly. Harry, realizing what he had done, he lowered the wand and slipped it back into his robes. He just stared at them for a while, studying their locked hands. It occurred to him how much he had drifted apart lately. Since when had Ron and Hermione started walking around holding hands? He continued to stand there, staring. Finally, Ron lifted an eyebrow. Are you there? Earth to Harry Potter. Harry forced himself out of his daze. Yeah, sorry. And he forced a smile. He's cracked, Ron noted to Hermione. Ron! He's been through so much. He doesn't need you. I know. Geez, Hermione. Harry, don't take that the wrong way. It's just that, he paused. You know, you've been through a lot, but you're starting to make me worried. Why have I hardly even seen you? They stood there awkwardly before Hermione made a suggestion. Why don't we all go to breakfast, shall we? We've got tests today. Harry came along and headed towards the great hall until he remembered what he had intended to do. At the same time, though, he wondered if just a few minutes having breakfast with his friends could be spared. So, what are Fred and George planning on doing? He asked, trying to start up a conversation. I don't know. I don't think they do, though Fred has a whacked idea. Ron allowed Hermione to walk ahead, and he hung back to walk beside Harry. Dad needs a new minister of the Department of Magical Games and Sport, and Fred has decided to apply for it. They can't find anyone right now, so he's sure to get it. What about George? George, you won't believe this. He wants to teach. George? Teaching? This sounded hard for even Hermione to believe. Yeah, that is what he said he wants to do. However, the only subject he thinks his Newt scores will be good enough for is Muggle studies and potions. And he wants to stay in Britain right now, and of course, those positions are already filled here. They were just about to enter the Great Hall when Professor McGonagall came through the doors and stood before them. Oh, just the person I wanted to see, Mr. Potter. Would you mind coming with me for a moment? She was looking at him in her usual stern way, but she didn't seem angry. Yes, Professor, he replied, and followed, after exchanging questioning glances with Ron and Hermione. Once they were out of earshot, McGonagall inquired, Are you doing all right, Harry? She sounded awkward about it. As well as can be expected, I suppose. McGonagall stopped inside. From what I heard, you have seen an awful lot that someone your age shouldn't have, but you've been a very brave boy. Her eyes seemed distant, even though they were looking at him, or, as a colleague of mine would put it, an extremely courageous young man who has proven himself to be a capable wizard far beyond his years. You impressed a great many people with what you did, including your stunt where you apparated all the way from Hogwarts to Diagon Alley. It's not every wizard that can apparate from the Scottish Highlands to London, and it's certainly no ordinary one who can do it shortly after learning how to apparate. Harry hadn't even thought of his apparating as being one of his greatest feats of the evening. But after all that has happened, I'm sure that it's taken a toll on you. There are many of us who are concerned about how you are doing. I'm feeling fine, Professor, Harry assured. All the aches and pains are gone. I do not mean in that sense, Harry. McGonagall's face suddenly appeared to soften and look genuinely concerned. Oh. Harry looked down the hall after where Ron and Hermione had disappeared. I'll be okay. McGonagall didn't seem too convinced. Well, I've spoken with your professors, and they have all agreed that you don't have to take part in the Owls just now. I'm not sure when, but I highly doubt you can perform well on mine at this point. This caught Harry by surprise. I don't? Not this week. We'll be discussing it further and decide exactly when you'll take them. But now, I don't want you telling your friends about this. This is a very unusual and individual case. I don't think anyone would be surprised that you were letting him not take the Owls.
That's like his yearly thing is he doesn't take any finals.
Right, and he just moves on to the next year and it's fine.
Has he ever once taken finals except for the Owls year?
Well, he did take the Owls. Well, year 4, no. Maybe year 3.
Year 3, because he scored higher than Hermione in Defense Against the Dark Arts.
Right. I do remember that.
And then year 5, and I think that was it. I think he only took 2 years of finals.
Yeah, because they were canceled in year 6 because Dumbledore died. And then he did not go to school for year 7, so, didn't take those. And then was just handed an Auror job because, he defeated the Dark Lord. So...
And they were canceled in year 1 because...
Voldemort was possessing Quirrell.
Yes, and they were canceled in year 2 because...
Chamber of Secrets.
Chamber of Secrets. Then they took them in year 3. They were canceled in year 4 because of the Goblet of Fire.
Did any of these students ever take finals?
Just year 3 and 5.
What happened to all the people taking the newts?
Didn't happen, apparently.
And the Owls?
Nope. Apparently it didn't happen.
But they talk about Fred and George's Owl scores.
That would have been year 3, wouldn't it?
No, year 4. Because in year 5 they were in year 6. So in year 4 they were in year 5. Right? No, 2 years ahead. Are they 2 years ahead?
I think they're 2 years ahead.
Yeah, they're 2 years ahead. All right, never mind.
So they would have taken it in year 3.
Okay.
I was going to say, because I thought they left during their final year, which would have been Harry's 5th year.
Correct. That's true.
Everybody's testing lined up perfectly for year 3 and year 5. That was a long tangent.
It was. Minerva, Remus Lupin interrupted. Oh, hello, Harry. He was approaching from the direction of the main entrance. Professor McGonagall, the minister, and the members of the board of the school governors are here, and your presence is needed. The Minister of Magic? But she had hardly time to ask before Mr. Weasley rounded the corner, flanked by the board of governors, Professor Snape, Flitwick, Sprout, and Sirius Black. This Harry found extremely odd.
Same, Harry.
When they all approached, he immediately asked, Sirius, what is... Sirius smiled, and so did Lupin. And Mr. Weasley. End of this episode. I think we all know what's happening, but y'all are going to have to wait until next week to find out. We're going to find out in about 5 minutes, so...
Cliffhanger.
We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us on our journey through the trap door.
Please leave us a review on Facebook or iTunes. It would literally mean the world to us.
It really would.
You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Through the Trapdoor 16 or on Twitter at The Trapdoor.
And please send us an email at throughthetrapdoor16@gmail.com with any story suggestions. And as always, join us again next Saturday as we travel through the trapdoor.